The evening started like countless others before it. I walked through the front door after another exhausting day at the office, loosening my tie as I stepped into our dimly lit living room. Sarah was curled up on the sofa, her attention completely absorbed by the glowing screen in her hands. For a moment, I paused in the doorway, watching her scroll mindlessly through social media. The silence between us had become so normal that it felt like another piece of furniture in the room, heavy, immovable, and impossible to ignore. I settled beside her on the couch, not too close, but near enough to feel the familiar distance that had grown between us over the past months. Without thinking, I reached out, my fingers barely grazing her arm in a gesture that once would have been natural, welcome even. That's when she turned to face me, her eyes sharp and cold as winter glass. "Don't," she said, her voice carrying a finality that made my blood freeze. "I'm not someone you can just reach for whenever you feel like it." The words hung in the air between us like a verdict. I pulled my hand back slowly, feeling something fundamental shift in my chest. This wasn't just another rejection. It was a declaration of war in a marriage I thought we were both still fighting for. I studied her face, searching for any hint that she didn't mean it, that perhaps stress or fatigue had made her words harsher than intended. But her expression remained unchanged, distant, almost relieved to have finally said what had been building inside her. "I see," I said quietly, leaning back against the cushions. The calmness in my own voice surprised me. For months, I had been the one trying to bridge the gap, to reignite the spark that had once made us inseparable. Now, in an instant, I felt that desperate energy drain away. Sarah returned to her phone, as if nothing significant had happened, as if she hadn't just redefined the boundaries of our relationship with a few simple words. But something had shifted in me, something irreversible. I stood up slowly, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. As I stood there, staring at my reflection in the dark window, a thought crystallized in my mind with startling clarity. If she doesn't want to be reached for, then perhaps she doesn't want to be kept either. To understand how we reached that moment, you have to go back to the beginning. Sarah and I met during a company retreat 5 years earlier. She worked in the marketing department while I was climbing the ladder in sales. She had this infectious laugh and a way of making everyone around her feel important. Our first conversation lasted until 3 in the morning, covering everything from childhood dreams to our biggest fears. By the end of that weekend, I knew I wanted to build a life with her. The early days were magical. Weekend adventures, surprise dinner dates, little notes left in each other's work bags. We moved in together after 8 months, got engaged after 2 years, and married in a small ceremony surrounded by family and friends. For a while, everything felt perfect. We were teammates, best friends, lovers, everything a couple should be. But somewhere along the way, the dynamic began to shift. It started subtly. The spontaneous kisses became less frequent. The evening conversations grew shorter. She began staying late at work more often, claiming new responsibilities demanded her attention. I supported her ambitions, proud of her success, assuming the distance was temporary. But temporary stretched into months, then years. The warmth in her voice when she spoke to me faded. Physical intimacy became scheduled, then infrequent, then practically non-existent. When I tried to address it, she'd brush off my concerns with excuses about being tired or stressed. I watched her light up during phone calls with friends, laughing in ways I hadn't heard in months. Yet when she looked at me, that same energy would dim instantly, as if my presence had somehow disappointed her. The night she told me not to reach for her wasn't the beginning of our problems. It was simply the moment she finally said out loud what her actions had been communicating for years. After that night, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I stopped trying. Not in anger or spite, but with the calm resolution of a man who had finally accepted reality. The next morning, I woke up early, made coffee for one, and left for work without the usual attempt at morning conversation. At the office, I threw myself into projects I had been putting off, staying late not to avoid going home, but because I genuinely wanted to excel. When I returned that evening, Sarah barely looked up from her tablet. Normally, I would have filled the silence with questions about her day or suggestions for dinner. Instead, I prepared a meal for myself, ate quietly, and spent the evening reading in my study. She noticed the change immediately. I could feel her glancing at me, waiting for me to return to the familiar pattern of pursuit and rejection. But I had stepped off that carousel for good. Over the following weeks, I began reclaiming parts of myself that had been lost in the struggle to save our marriage. I reconnected with old friends, started going to the gym regularly, and even began exploring business opportunities one had shelved years earlier. At home, I became politely distant. Bills were paid, household duties handled, but the emotional labor I had been carrying alone simply stopped. If she wanted conversation, she had to initiate it. If she wanted plans made, she had to make them. The shift in dynamic was unmistakable. The woman who had spent months pushing me away suddenly found herself reaching for someone who was no longer there to catch her. One evening, she actually asked, "Why are you being so cold lately?" I looked up from my laptop and replied calmly, "I'm not being cold. I'm just matching the energy you've been giving me." For the first time in months, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. The end came not with dramatic confrontation, but with quiet certainty. 3 months after that pivotal night, I rented a small apartment across town. I packed my essentials while she was at work, leaving behind a simple note: "You made it clear you didn't want to be reached for. I've decided you don't need to be kept either." The freedom was immediate and intoxicating. My own space, my own schedule, my own peace. I poured energy into my career and watched opportunities multiply. Old friendships deepened, new ones formed. I rediscovered who I was when I wasn't constantly trying to earn someone else's affection. Within 6 months, I met Emma at a professional conference. She was intelligent, warm, and most importantly, consistent in her affections. With her, I didn't have to wonder where I stood or fight for basic emotional intimacy. Meanwhile, Sarah's world began to shrink. The friends who had once enjoyed her company at expensive restaurants funded by my income gradually drifted away. Her work performance suffered under the weight of personal stress. The independence she had demanded came with a price she hadn't anticipated. She started calling, texting, leaving voicemails filled with regret and promises to change. But by then, my heart had moved on. The man who once begged for her attention was gone, replaced by someone who knew his worth. We met one final time, at a coffee shop. She looked smaller somehow, worn down by the reality of the choice she had made. Through tears, she admitted she had been wrong, that she missed what we had. I listened without emotion, then stood to leave. "You were right that night," I told her. "You weren't someone I should reach for. And you were right about something else too. You weren't someone I should keep." Today, I'm remarried to Emma, living in a home filled with genuine warmth and mutual respect. My career has never been stronger, my friendships never deeper. Sometimes the greatest kindness you can show someone is proving they were right about what they claim to want. Sarah wanted distance. I gave her all the distance in the world. She wanted independence. She got more than she ever imagined. And I learned that sometimes the best response to someone who doesn't want to be reached for is simply to stop reaching.